Hey, it's Friendo here. Now, after watching this debate, it seems clear to me that Fringeelements needs some support. So I'm going to try to do something positive here and go through what I see as the biggest mistakes that you have made here, Fringeelements, in this debate. So hopefully you can do better in the future. Now, my general overview. There are three things you need to stop doing. One, long silences. It's okay if someone has made a point and you say, hold on, let me look something up, or I'm going to need a moment to respond. But if someone says something in a debate, which is a real-time format, and you just sit there and don't say anything, then it makes it seem like you don't understand what they've said, or understand perfectly well and have absolutely no way to counter their argument, and that all you're going to do is say something lame to follow up. Two, tortured analogies. The thing about analogies is they are very weak rhetorical devices to use in a debate. The reason why you would normally use an analogy is if you are a teacher and you are explaining a concept to someone that is functionally over their head. You're only explaining it to them in very broad terms to get them up to a certain level of understanding that will be built on in the future. Similarly, as a student, you might use an analogy to demonstrate that to your teacher that you understand the concept up to that functional level that you are being taught. But amongst adults, if we are having a discussion where we are attempting to get to root causes and large understandings, such as how social phenomena work and how we can improve people's lives, we have to get far beyond analogies. More importantly, if someone has given you a piece of evidence from scientific literature and is asking for a rebuttal, you can't accomplish your rhetorical goal. You can't accomplish your goal in debating them by going off with an analogy. It's not going to actually connect to what it is you're attempting to refute. Three, you only seem comfortable when you're talking to an empty room. Now, this being the case, you really need to only be making your arguments in video exchange. If you are in a real-time debate, then you are going to have to interact with your opponent. This means responding to things that they say and allowing them to respond to things you say, back and forth. This is the hallmark of a real-time debate. If you want to preach, if you want to speak to an empty room, then stick to the video exchange. So, here's the first real mistake I think you made.
I'm typically, I'm very US-centric in my analysis.
How can you justify this? If the subject is race and intelligence, which are two things that are universal among humans, that all of humanity at all places and all times would be applicable data sets, why would you restrict yourself to just the US? You're needlessly shooting yourself in the foot. To begin with, you're not going to be able to adequately respond to information that your opponent brings up, which is what ends up happening in the debate.
What is the delineator between races?
I do not have a discrete answer for that.
Now, you don't have any excuse for this. The Skeptical Heretic did videos leading up to this debate, and he made this a central question. How do you differentiate a race? If you can't, then you have no basis, scientific or otherwise, to say that there's such a thing. Now, you backpedal out of this saying, well, the term race isn't what's significant, but it's the argument of the race that is significant. And if you can't differentiate what makes a population group, then you can't adequately defend your argument. Your argument being that there is a correlation between race and intelligence, you have to go into this defining both race and intelligence. Now, that's your job from the very beginning. You were the affirmative, so you got to lead with a thesis statement. When you construct your thesis, you have to give a concise definition of exactly what your argument is, a small amount of supporting information, I would say 3 or 4 pieces of evidence that build your case definitively. Then have some more evidence on hand just to refute counterpoints or to shore up weak areas through your opponent's argumentation.
They also found that, although not as much weight, stereotype threat also plays in.
Are you talking about the Minnesota transracial?
No, I'm talking about the Sky study of genetics.
I've never heard of this study, but you're saying that environment.
Well, this is actually the same study that Rushton used to critique Flynn's statement of the Flynn effect versus the Jensen effect.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe you should be familiar with that if you're familiar with Rushton's catalog of science on this, or what we would call science.
Well, I'm not, but...
You have to get away from this idea that somehow having the most evidence gives you a win, or that a debate is going to consist of reading off a list of evidence. No, you present a thesis, and then you support it with as small amount of information as possible. Be concise. That's what will give you the strongest case.
Like, I can't identify every single gene that is associated with intelligence or associated with IQ scores. So,
again, a huge negative admission. If you can't identify the genes associated with IQ, then you can't say that there is a genetic correlation between race and IQ, because you don't know what genes bring about IQ, just like you don't know what genes bring about race.
Look, race is a pre-scientific concept. Look, you can do the same thing with lightning.
This is a really incoherent argument. Race is a pre-scientific term. Racism is a pre-scientific prejudice. Arguing for race and racist arguments is entirely atavistic. You can't score any points here if you even admit that you're making an atavistic argument. It takes you nowhere, particularly when what we're discussing is the leading edge, the bleeding edge of biological science.
Do you want to move on to closing?
When your opponent gives you this out, it means that you aren't adequately defending your position, that any argument that you've presented thus far has already been refuted, and there doesn't seem to be any hope on the horizon of you salvaging the debate. If your opponent gives you the opportunity to move on to closing, you should take him up on it.
You want to take a couple minutes?
Remember what I said earlier about the long silences? This is exactly the point where you should take your opponent up on his offer. Get a couple minutes to go through the evidence that he's presented. Now, you should have done your research ahead of time. You should already be aware not just of information that supports your thesis, but what the major arguments against your position are. That way, when your opponent brings up evidence of his own, you can speak about it with some level of intelligence.
I haven't even finished my critique of Tizard. You've been interrupting me this whole time. So I haven't been able to make any points.
I haven't been interrupting you. I've been giving you the information when you're wrong.
As I said before, debates occur in real time. Don't complain that your opponent is interrupting you when it is the evidence that they are bringing up. Questioning of the evidence and letting you know when evidence has been refuted. To say that your opponent is interrupting you in a live debate is not going to be impressive to your audience.
IQ, IQ is a test that people take. I don't know what intelligence is. No, like intelligence has been debated.
So then, how can
there
you
is no
say that
clear-cut
intelligence is
definition of
heritable if
intelligence.
you don't even know what it is?
I said
And we're sinking. If you're going to argue about IQ in any context, then you need to know what it is. You need to know how it's tested. You need to know what the prevailing theories are. You need to know more than one theory, just as you need to know more than one test. And that's just IQ. You need to understand the motility of IQ. You need to understand that it's only a limited predictor. And that's even beside the question of intelligence.
I don't know what intelligence is.
By the way, that is one of the most pwnable video clips on the internet. Expect to see that one come up again.
Okay, well, I recommend the viewers.
I mean, I'm listing off peer-reviewed, published, publicly vetted studies to you, and you're giving me Wikipedia and personal blog sites. Do you see the problem with that?
Well, my guess is I would question whether you have read all of those things, but...
Terrible argument. It does you no good to present an argument of this kind, that your opponent clearly hasn't read or couldn't have read the evidence that they're presenting, because it creates the impression that you haven't read all of the evidence that you're presenting. Your opponent says that he's bringing up peer-reviewed literature, and he's specifically bringing it up in reference to the arguments that you are making. Evidence that you present, he presents counter-evidence. You respond by saying, well, this guy has a really big blog that has all sorts of information. Then when you look at him and say, well, I don't think you've read all of your evidence, that creates the impression that you, Fringe, haven't read all of your evidence. This is called projection. If you are well read on a subject, not just what confirms your position, but how your position is refuted, and then refutations of that, and refutations of that, so forth, up to what the discussion is, what the debate is right now, today, then you're not going to enter into a debate like this looking at someone and saying, well, I don't know what you're saying, so clearly you're making it up.
I can't respond to that because I don't know exactly what it says. I mean, you can say this study says environment, this study says environment, and you can link off tons of studies saying environment, but like that's not really argumentation. That's just kind of stating your position and then flooding with sources. You know, I don't really care much about race. I don't even care much about the preservation of any race or any racial group or anything like that. I'm not against people who want to.
Now, here's what's really behind this entire debate. You have been hyper-intellectualizing the concept that we can question assumptions that go against race and then call that fair debate, call that open-mindedness. But what's really behind this argument is passive-aggressive support of racism and white nationalism.
My argument is that you have, like, you don't deny that there are these different populations, right? I'm really disappointed with this debate because I don't think that you were trying to understand my arguments. I think you were really gung-ho about race having a clear definition, okay? And I think this came from a false perception that you had of me, that I am, like, obsessed with race. Now, I used to be a white nationalist.
You're still in that camp. Just as you're making the argument that we need to be finding disadvantaged areas and giving them access to more trade schools instead of whatever other educational opportunities are available for them, you are preaching a dogma of delineating race when you haven't established a rational reason for why. You want to create the social and economic conditions that would make these divisions permanent and would create such a thing as race. It's a fiat accompli for you. Because it is already a part of your presuppositions, you're going to argue that we should be in a world that would create and support such distinctions.
Different people divide race differently.
So would you say it's fair for me to say that race is a social construct arbitrarily based on the opinions of outward appearance?
Yes. Yes.
Then we're done.
Now, in order to polish your skills, I think you need to debate with someone who's more at your level. So I found you a debate partner. You need to study her videos, get spun up on her evidence, and then I think the two of you could have a really well-matched debate.
To deny the existence of race is to betray who you really are. Pretty much the only thing that matters in our pathetic existence. If anything should matter, it's IQ. We should be a little more concerned with IQ. Not so much individual IQ, but that of a collective racial group. It's usually your race, in general, your race, that determines your IQ. I am not your research tool. I'm not here to provide you with all the quantitative data. Do your own research.
I'm Friendo. Thanks for watching, and I really hope you consider my advice.
Okay, but even then, it was like all voluntary. I didn't want to force anyone into. I thought that people would generally be happier if they went off in their races, or I misguided, but that's what I generally believed. So, you know, whatever. I'm out of here. I don't really care to listen to what you have to say. So.